Bad luck or a bad game? I'm in between it. Liverpool losing at home to Nottingham Forest yesterday 1-0. A Callum Hudson-Odoi goal coming off of the bench with him and Anthony Elanga making quite the impact. Super subs working well. Pace hitting Liverpool on the break. And it was a bit of a blunt game from Liverpool, wasn't it? After having such a good start, a lot of positivity surrounding Arne Slot. And I was going to say the new Liverpool, but it's kind of the old Liverpool just with a new manager because the only signing he's really made is Chiesa, who wasn't, or at least I don't think was in the squad, didn't come off the bench. And Forest had a game plan. They produced it brilliantly, did fantastically in their structure and their shape, and played the 90 minutes perfectly. And while I looked at this lineup and thought, there's no real counter-attacking threat from Nottingham Forest for this because Hudson-Odoi and Lang were on the bench. I think it was intentional. I mean, it was obviously intentional, and I haven't heard Nuno's press conferences or interviews to know that this was the actual intention. But I feel like he played the 90 minutes. He used those subs when they were going to be at their most vulnerable, Liverpool, and they'd been attacking non-stop for 60, 70 minutes, and they were a bit more vulnerable, and they were getting a bit more desperate, and they came on and hurt them, which is effective because Hudson-Odoi and Elanga are two good players, but they're not amazing technical players when there's a bit more tightness to the game, when it's a bit more of a competitive edge. They had their uses at the end of the game when space opens up, when a team who's more dominant leaves space that can be exploited by fresher players. And I feel like in using the team he had set out, it kept the structure intact. And I'll go over that in more detail now as we talk about Liverpool's attacking shape and Nottingham Forest's defensive shape. So with Liverpool, it's as you were, as we've seen under Arne Slot so far, with the three at the back, the McAllister and Gravenberch holding players, Szoboszlai in between the midfield and defensive line of the opposition, with Jota, Salah, and Diaz providing the attacking three. Alexander-Arnold being given a bit of a free role in between his natural right back position, coming inside to help out the midfield, or moving right out into the right wing to allow Salah to push inside. Forest setting up in a very compact 4-4-2, very little space in between the lines for Liverpool to work with. They'd sit deep, they'd protect the middle, and they did a fantastic job of always maintaining that structure and that amount of players behind the ball. So it was obviously rotating a lot between that back three. And here's an issue I do have with Arne Slot's system and his build-up. It's so narrow, so very narrow. And if you look at the goals they have scored, the 3 goals against United, I'm pretty sure the 2 against Brentford, and the Ipswich game was different because Ipswich were playing a pretty high tempo style of football, and there's a gulf in quality between the two teams. But Liverpool's goals so far and their best attacking work has been transitionally, counter attacking play, fast paced tempo, which is reminiscent of Jurgen Klopp, which is no shock. This is still a Jurgen Klopp team. But as opposed to their actual build up and their actual quality, they found space against United because United's off the ball structure is, as I've spoken about before, terrible. Forest's was compact, it was responsible, and I think this is why he put in the likes of Dominguez at right wing, of Elliot Anderson at left wing, because they're midfielders who would naturally have more of a responsible edge to them than fast-paced attacking wingers. They manage the distances with their midfielders a lot better, and they'd be a lot more defensively responsible, which was needed to keep Liverpool out in the first half. Nottingham Forest in the first half didn't have a shot on goal. It was all about keeping Liverpool out and frustrating them, which this midfield four did expertly. And Liverpool really found it hard to break through. It was long balls from the back to Salah or to Diaz in these areas, and Salah really struggled. The long ball to Salah is always on because Salah's first touch is excellent. So even when that pass doesn't appear like it's on, the fantastic long range passing of Van Dijk to the brilliant control of Salah is always a threat. But Moreno, I felt like, dealt with him expertly. One on one, he kept Salah quiet all game. And in the midfield, where Liverpool did try and use their fluidity to break this Forest shape down, Forest nullified it well. So Szoboszlai could come out into the left, Alexander Arnold would come inside, which meant Gravenberch pushed up a little bit into this position here, and it was fluid. There was interchanging. You'd see Alexander Arnold come across here. You'd see McAllister move up into the left 10 position. But the narrowness of this made it easier for Forest to stay in a more compact shape, not just vertically but horizontally as well, making sure there was very little occasion where they could play those passes in between the lines and through the shape. Forest defended these areas zonally fantastically. And there's a couple players individually that I'm going to point out, but I'll start from the front and work my way back. Gibbs White did a fantastic job of sticking on. It was usually Gravenberch in this position. He'd be the sort of go-to playmaker, that pivot to take it from defence into attack. So Gibbs White sat on him and did a really good job, whereas Wood would drop in on McAllister if he dropped deep, but would also look to shadow him while half pressing the player on the ball. So let's just say if it came out to Van Dijk here, while keeping McAllister behind him, he did a fantastic job of just making sure he was within his shadow to prevent that easy ball round the side of him. And because of Robertson's narrow positioning, it meant that Dominguez had a bit more freedom to come up a bit more alongside Wood and Gibbs White, and he did a really good job of just sort of maintaining a real lack of forward play from Robertson on this side. And a massive part of what Dominguez and Anderson were trying to do with their positioning, while not just coming around to take care of these players here, would be to shadow a flat ball into Diaz and into Salah. Anderson had a little bit more to worry about, is with Alexander Arnold's fluid positioning. He had to sort of manage two players at once, but Moreno did a good job of sticking to Salah, while Anderson would shadow easy pass into Alexander Arnold wherever he was by going to Mark Canate. So let's just say if Van Dijk played that ball in here, Anderson would make sure he would shadow this pass into Alexander Arnold, pressing the player on the ball, preventing him from playing forward, forcing him back again. And I have to say, Anderson's role in this team was fantastic, because there's a lot of times where Salah would push into the centre. He'd bring Moreno with him. Moreno wouldn't hold the width. He'd follow Salah inside, giving more license for Trent Alexander-Arnold to attack the right-hand side. Anderson was then forced back into a left-back position where he did that role fantastically, protected that left-hand side. And I have to say, from Trent Alexander-Arnold, he's been applauded a lot this season, and rightly so, because his performances have been fantastic. This felt like a very lazy performance. There was something about the body language I didn't quite like. I'm not going to say it's concerning, because it's one game, and he's had some fantastic games this season for Liverpool and for England. But this felt a bit, I don't know, when you think of the tantrums he's had after being substituted, this felt very worrying. It's not worrying if it's a one-off game, but this is one of those that if this turns into a repeated pattern, I don't know, and maybe I'm just sort of drawing two and two together to make five because of the issues he's had with getting subbed off in recent games. And it does feel like there is a little bit of friction. There does seem to be a little bit of friction between him and Arne Slot. And games like this doesn't help. And one issue that Alexander Arnold has is he wasn't really being allowed the time and space on the ball. He'd sometimes get it if he dropped back into this defensive line, but Forrest did a really good job of blocking the pass in, and it gave Anderson more license to come up here and try and press Alexander Arnold. But he's not very press resistant, Alexander Arnold. So when he would move forward into these positions and help overload the middle, and I will say Wood and Gibbs White did a fantastic job of, if the ball was played in behind him, they'd backwards press really well. Alexander Arnold, for as good as he is technically, and we know how fantastic he is on the ball, he's not amazingly press resistant. He works better in space, doesn't work as well under pressure for someone who's so technically gifted, which is maybe why we haven't seen him explode in a midfield role that people are so commonly talking about. You get more time at fullback inverting than you do as a midfielder when you're outnumbering an opposition's press. But Forest made sure they kept their four when Liverpool tried to turn it into a bit of a box midfield. Jota didn't get much rain to drop in and help create either. Another player I'm gonna applaud fantastically, Ryan Yates. I thought he was excellent. Now, fair play to him, because I know he's club captain, but to keep finding your place in this Nottingham Forest team when they spent up-teen amounts of money on some very technically gifted footballers, but still providing a use that nobody else in the squad really offers, is a testament to his character. Is he technically amazing? No. Will he run through a brick wall, and will he perform whatever task Nuno was going to give him out on that pitch? Yes, and he did that expertly this game. Now, he did it in a number of ways. One is Diaz would sometimes come a little bit short in looking for the ball to try and create overloads. This would drag Ola Aina with him and creating a bit of space in between Milinkovic and himself. Yates dropped in and filled that superbly, where you would get the run of Szoboszlai, maybe on occasion McAllister, and as the game wore on, you get Robertson attacking the space. He filled that gap perfectly and made sure there was no underlapping runs that Diaz could use. And when Diaz would switch inside, looking to play inside, the midfielders dropped in, Dominguez dropped back into position, and this goes for the left-hand side as well, where Anderson would drop in. Wood and Gibbs White did a really good job of dropping in and making sure that midfield four was intact. So let's say Diaz on the ball here, look for the easy pass to McAllister. Wood would drop in, making sure he got himself in behind the ball, protecting that defensive line, protecting the space in between defence and midfield, making sure that sort of left half space doesn't open up. And as the ball would then move back inside, him or Gibbs White would move back and look to regain their sort of 5-3-2 shape. And if the danger was gone, Yates would then push back up and fulfil that midfield role. So you did see Yates and Dominguez swap positions a lot, just the way that their marking roles had taken them in that situation. But they were both very responsible and both defended expertly in those areas. And also, I thought Yates did a really good job of, in the situations where Alexander-Arnold and Van Dijk would drop into the defensive line, leaving maybe Gravenberch as the sole pivot. Him and McAllister had a bit of a battle here, where if Gibbs White and Wood were a bit outnumbered and there was a bit of space for a player to receive it in between the front two for Forest and the midfield, Yates would jump and press fantastically to make sure he couldn't get time on the ball to turn and play forward. And because of the fact that Liverpool had more players back, that meant there was less options for McAllister to play a pass round into space or a supporting player that could play it into the more advanced areas. And Yates shut that off instantly, forcing him having to go back to the deeper areas where they could then regain their shape and Liverpool had to restart again. Fantastic Yates. He covered space from behind well, pressed when he needed to. He was aggressive. Fantastic. One little hiccup where he tried to shield the ball out going for a goal kick, and Diaz cut in front of him and used some great anticipation, great work rate, and almost produced a fantastic finish at the near post. But other than that, he was superb. Yates flawless at points, and so it was very flat from a Liverpool perspective. I thought the forward three were pretty poor. Jota, you wouldn't have known was in the game. The deeper players in McAllister and Gravenberch weren't being given the license to get on the ball and progress it. Defensively, it was a perfect game plan from Nottingham Forest, and Liverpool's substitutions did them no favours whatsoever. They didn't provide any real impact. Nunes, I thought, was poor. Gakpo again was anonymous. You got to give the credit to the shape of Nottingham Forest. With the level of team that Liverpool are, I thought some really individually poor performances. And in the second half, when they got a bit desperate and Robertson was pushing forward into this area, trying to create overloads in those central areas, which left them a bit more vulnerable at the back, this is where Nuno made his substitutions count. Dominguez going off the pitch, Anderson going off the pitch, Hudson-Odoi coming on at left wing, Anthony Elanga at right wing, who still did the defensive jobs perfectly. Elanga would drop in well to cover this area here. Hudson-Odoi as well, covering space brilliantly, still defensively responsible. But then when they won the ball back and Liverpool would give it away cheaply in these areas, they had the pace to counter and get the ball forward and dribble at the heart of that Liverpool back line. And as the game wears on and Liverpool have pushed that many men forward, those remaining defensive players are going to struggle with that transition, are going to struggle with that quick change of play. And the goal came from Anthony Elanga getting it on this right-hand side for Forest as Robertson had pushed high up the pitch, getting up, running into space as the defensive three dropped back. By this point, Conor Bradley had come on, so he was in place of Alexander-Arnold, where he could race into that space that was created, forcing the Liverpool back three along. Gravenberch and Trent Alexander-Arnold struggling to come back in the middle. Hudson-Odoi receiving it on the left from a good pass, taking it inside and producing a fantastic finish. But they turned this into a 12-round boxing fight. They stayed in it and hit them hard when it counted. They weren't death by a thousand cuts for us. They just needed that one big knockout blow to hit Liverpool, and they pulled it off fantastically. Didn't really offer a lot in the first half attacking-wise, as I said. The odd little bit of sustained attacking, and usually it was just down to quick balls up to Chris Wood and Gibbs White, who I thought did a fantastic job of winning fouls in these areas. And that was a massive part of what Forest were trying to do. Slow the game down, make it stop-start, disrupt Liverpool, just frustrate them. And Van Dijk and Konate especially were pulled into little silly moments where they just come and tackle Gibbs White and Wood from behind, where they were clearly looking for the fouls, which was part of the game plan when getting Ward-Prowse on his free kicks and his corners. And Liverpool fell for those just little traps time and time again, which for a team as experienced as this is a little bit poor. And Gibbs White did receive it from time to time in behind. He seemed to have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the linesman that did him no favours whatsoever. So he didn't get the luck that he probably deserved at points, but I thought his work off the ball from an attacking sense was a bit underrated. And the few times they would sustain attacks, Dominguez would come inside, Moreno would attack the left-hand side, getting forward and look for the balls from Gibbs White, who did a fantastic job of recycling play in those transitional situations with Moreno in the first half and then with Hudson-Odoi and Elanga in the second half. As I say, transitionally, that was always going to be the threat for Forest, and Liverpool left themselves open time and time again, being too desperate to get that goal, forcing the fullbacks forward. Trent Alexander-Arnold not being great on the transition either. Robertson not having the legs to get back once he's beaten, and Forest used the pace and the substitutions to exploit it fantastically. Brilliant game plan from Nuno. Full credit to him, man. For me, is this a concern for Liverpool? It all depends on how they respond in the midweek against AC Milan. If they lose against AC Milan, you maybe start thinking and speculating as to whether that opening month of the season was just an easy section of games. I know they played United, but it was a poor performance from United. And then the rest of the season becomes a little bit more difficult as a result. But they've got to bounce back from this. I never thought they were going to win the league. So people coming out and suggesting that this is a performance which suggests they're not going to win the league, I don't know who was really predicting that to begin with. So we'll see. For me, if this is an issue, will only become obvious in the coming weeks and months and how we can contextualise this result. At the minute, it could just be a freak result. But we'll see. But thank you guys for watching. Like it if you liked the video, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below and tell me why, and subscribe if you want to see more. In a bit, lads.